Octavia couldn't see the giant monster roaming around in the fog, but then again, she could barely see anything at it wasn't 2 feet in front of her face. At the very thought that something huge could be towering towards her at any moment chilled her to the core. But staying in one place was not the safer option either. So Octavia was hurrying through the streets, hoping to avoid the monsters that lurked in the fog. The street on the way to the park was thankfully wide open, giving her plenty of room to escape. A few splinters she had encountered were dodged easily, though, if she were somehow to find herself being cornered by them in an alleyway. Octavia shook the thought of from her head, focusing moving ahead. There were a lot of things that could go wrong, but it didn't do her any good to focus on them. As long as she avoided the monsters, she'd be alright. That was until she came to a skidding halt in front of another dead end in the middle of the street. She then stared up at the large fence built up in the middle of the road, built almost exactly the same way as the last one. There was no way around it, and the thick, corrugated metal sure made it like she tried, but she could never make it through. Damn it all, Octavia cursed under her breath. Looking around the fence, she could double back and try and find another road. But then she might get cornered by one of the splinters again, then like before. Maybe there was a faster way around, like though one of the buildings that the fence was built into. Checking the left side of the fence yielded to no results, as she thought the large square building was boarded up with no visible front door, and could try and check out the entire length of the building. But that would be just as much effort as doubling back at this point. So with the left side ruled out, she then checked the building on the right. This building proved to be far more promising, as it clearly resembled a house at the blockade that where it had been built into. It was out of place though, seeing that the street that she had been running down was one of Ponyville's shopping districts. She then pushed through those thoughts along the side, since the layout of the town had obviously changed drastically in the short period of time. She also checked to see if there was a path around the house that might be useful, but that turned out to be a dead end, a cement wall that had erected between the house and the building next to it, preventing anyone from going around it. The front of the door of the house was on the side that was blockaded at least, was her options being to check the door on or turn back. She then walked up to the door and tried the handle. The door let out a creak as it slowly opened before jamming in place. It took a good shove of her shoulder to get the door to properly open all the way. Seeing that its hinges had long since rusted over, the inside of the house was dark, but there was some light flickering through the barred up windows. The front of the house had deposited her into depleted in the living room. There was an aging, torn up couch in front of a rusty coffee table. Interesting though, a teapot and two teacups were set on the table, although no liquid had been poured. From the living room extended from the two hallways and the open doorway that looked like it led to the kitchen. Stepping further into the house and closing the rusted door behind for a good measure, she looked down the hallways into the living room. The scant light didn't reach far, but she could see at least 3 doors down to the right and two down the much shorter hallway. The air was thick and musty, a clear sign that no one had lived there in years, much like the other buildings that must have been abandoned when the monsters overtook the town. The most important part was whether or not that the house had a way of getting through the other side of the fence. On the other than the living room, the kitchen was, as well as the area of most of the house, so she decided to check it out first. The kitchen contained the usual assortment of the appliances that were all rusted over with age, a table large enough to fit a four comfortably, several cabinets, and that Octavia suspected that were all empty or not worth looking through. What did catch her attention was the big red door that looked like the exit into the backyard, or the porch that was just right in the spot exit out of the side of the other fence at the table. It seemed like the fence had been built around the house and not go through it. Fortunately for me, I suppose, Octavia commented to herself, walking up to the door and taking a look at it. There were 3 padlocks on the door, padlocking the door tight from the other side. She then furrowed her brow and then grabbed one of the locks, giving it a tough pull to see if it was loose. It jiggled with the metal holding it in place, and it seemed to be firmly locked. On one blockade was replaced with another, it seems, she then says with a sigh of frustration. At least it looked like I could be able to open this one. Her attention was then turned to the piece of paper that had been pinned to the wall next to the door. Noticing that something was written on it, the message was terribly messy, written in hoof writing that was hard to picture at first. But a bit careful to study, she had an idea of what it said. The bright light of the night shine on the high sky, over the head of lonely mare, that's holding a weapon to her heart. What in Equestria does that mean? Octavia's brow furrowed in confusion, but there was an arrow on the paper that was pointing towards the door, so the natural conclusion that was to do something with opening up the door. So the door was likely a riddle. And if that were solved, the door would open. Well, I guess I have two options then, she murmured to herself. I could figure out how to open this door, or I can go back outside and find another way around. So either search for a house that had proven to be safe, or go back to the outside of the nightmarish monster-filled fog. It's hardly a decision, really. With a shake of her head, she turned around and made her way back to the living room. There were two alley hallways for her to search. One was went deeper into the house, where she'd have to pull it out her lantern to see in, or the one that was relatively short and had two doors that she could clearly see. Without a second thought, she made her way down the short hallway. The doors were on her either side of the hallway, and one to her left and one near to her right. The one door on the right had been sealed up, boarded with the thick planks of wood, at least with two chains. Whoever barricaded the room had clearly wanted no pony to see what was inside it. So with her option being clear, she entered the left door. First, Octavia couldn't tell what the room's purpose was, seeing that it looked like a tornado had struck it. Clothes were tossed everywhere, furniture lay broken on the walls, blankets and pillows were tossed on the ground without care, torn picture frames that hung from the walls, blankets and pillows, but of course, what might have been once a respectable bedroom now looked like a hoarder's nest. What on earth happened here? Navigating the room was tricky, but since she wasn't sure where it was safe for her to step, once she had found her footing, she drew closer to the bed, noticing two things on it. First thing was an old bloodstain that looked fairly large and a spot where a pony's head would normally rest. Other was a note on the left corner on the page stained with crimson liquid. She carefully picked it up in the paper and read what it said. The man's wife came home early. The man was not alone. The wife screamed loudly and the other woman quickly fled. Oh, Octavia murmured in realization, looking back around the room and then back at the bloodstain. That would mostly certainly explain the state of this room, even in the bloodshed. As much as Octavia abhorred violence, she could at least understand why some ponies resorted to it. What was all in that room had to offer her, though? Octavia felt like she was missing something important, perhaps something to do tied to the note. One riddle led to another, but she wasn't any closer to opening the door. Scanning the room once more, her eyes fell into the only part of the room that hadn't been destroyed. In the chaos was a desk, pressed up against the wall with a box on top of it. Being careful of her step, she made her way down the desk and then looked it over. The box actually had a small chest, with a lock on the side and a series of 4 buttons on the top. The buttons were colored in red, yellow, green, and blue, with simplified pony face drawn on each. The red button had an angry face, the green had a normal smiley face, the yellow one had a face of fear, and the blue one looked like it was yelling. Octavia blinked at the buttons, and then looked back at the notepad. It couldn't be that simple, could it? With the note in mind, she pushed down the green button first, followed by the red one, then the blue one, and eventually the yellow one. The box let out a click, telling Octavia it was now unlocked. Apparently, opening the box had been that simple. Pushing the box open, she was greeted with the antique key that had a moon embolized on it. You know what? I'm not going to question it, Octavia decided. There on the doorway and the door, and she had now had the key that could potentially get her through it. That was good enough for her. Quickly putting the key in her bag, she navigated through the messy room and back into the alleyway. She stopped when she suddenly smelling by the scent of iron in the air. She then turned to her head and screamed and caught in her throat. And a fresh coat of blood had been splattered against the hallway wall. It had been so fresh that it was still dripping. There was no way she had missed that on the way in. She rushed out of the hallway and looked around frantically in the living room for some pony that had been hurt, or for those monsters from outside. However, nothing else out of that house was out of place, only the fresh blood in the hallway. What the hell is going on here? Octavia cursed under her breath, no longer feeling safe in the house. The phonograph in her bag hadn't made a sound, and it didn't seem like there was a monster in the house with her. But it was also possible that the phonograph couldn't warn her about every monster she encountered. Okay, okay, let's just try the door again and keep moving, Octavia. The less time we spent here, the better. She was unnerved to say the least, and it was the last thing she simply avoiding the monsters out on the street. It was another to have the world messing with her like this. She had had enough from what the nightmares were. The kitchen door then came into sight as she rushed through the house, eager to get out as quickly as possible. She pulled the key out and grabbed the most top padlock on the door, trying the moon key on it. The padlock clicked open, and now able to be freed from the door. A bit of hope had filled her heart in the process, but she reached up and grabbed the key, tried it out on the next lock, hoping it might open the door comfortably. Both the key and the lock disintegrated into a pile of ash before her. She stared at the empty space in disbelief, uncertain of what exactly just happened. Then she began to swell with anger, her body shaking as she grit her teeth out, letting out an angry cry. She shriveled her body around and struck at the door with her hind legs. A wooden sound thud echoed throughout the house of their extermination. So that's what their game it is, Octavia growled under her breath. A riddle to open the door, and riddles to find the keys. While exploring the house for Jen's safety, the first one was easy, so I can learn this a little lesson. She then turned and trotted back to her living room. Well, I'm not going to go play their game, whoever they are. I am sure there's another way to get back to the park. It might take a little longer, but it's better than being stuck in this place. She made her way to the front door, twisting the handle and expecting it to open like it had before. A defiant jammed locking sound came from the door instead. What? No, 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 no. You were just open! Octavia cried out in panic, wrapping her hooves around the handle trying to force it open. No matter how she twisted or pulled, the only thing she heard was a lock defying her exit out of each time. Let me out! Octavia punctuated each word while slamming her shoulder against the door. A futile effort, and it only made her muscles ache. She let out another frustrated, angry cry and kicked the door with her hind legs. The door let out a wooden thud, but remained untouched despite the abuse. Octavia stepped away from the door, her breath growing shaky from her panic. She was trapped in here. Okay, just keep calm, Octavia. Don't panic. Just keep calm. She then covered her face in her hooves, repeating the words to herself. If she panicked, nothing good would happen. If she had calmed down and think this through, she wasn't permanently trapped in this house. She would just have to find the other two keys to unlock the back door. Sure, the house had a fresh coat of blood in some of these hallways, but she hadn't exactly encountered a monster yet. The world was just screwing with her, and she had experienced that and worse in her nightmares. Okay, calm. Octavia repeated this in a maternal one more time. She wasn't tranquil, but she had calmed down, though, to think clearly. The next two keys that had been in their house somewhere. She had already checked one in her room, and there were 3 doors to her left to check. She got back to her hooves and walked towards the darker 2 hallways. She pulled out her lantern, turned the dial, and the flame coming to life. With the light to guide her way, she made her way deeper into the house. There were 3 doors in this hallway. Almost immediately to her left, one in the middle to the right, and the one at the very end. If there was a monster in the house, she didn't want to be cornered in by the hallway, so she was checking each door as she made her way to the most sense. With that plan in mind, she had checked the first door and found it to be open with a slight creak. It was another bedroom, although this was by far the less chaotic than the last one. A bed went against the middle of the wall, vanity is to the left, the dresser to the right, and beside a table. And by the door was a desk with a lamp. She could also see a small closet with a personal bathroom aligned to the right wall. There was no blood staining, anything visible in the room this time, although she didn't expect that at last. There was something about the bedroom that seemed awfully familiar, but she couldn't place her hoof on it. Rather than dwell on it, though, she moved to the first things her eyes caught us of. There were 2 things that were on the bed. At first there was a black jacket, and the other was a note. Figuring it was a riddle for the next key, she walked straight to the note and read it. A dark and empty room, the light suddenly turns on, a thick coat is tossed aside, a mare collapses onto her bed, yet another night alone. Alright then, now I just have to find the box with the key is hiding in, she then muttered to herself, expecting this puzzle to be just as the same as the last. So she gets set to work on finding the box with the buttons on it, assuming that it had been in plain sight. Nothing was on the vanity or desk, or in the small bathroom or closet. The obvious locations failed, so she checked underneath the furniture, her search bearing no results. Her brow furrowed in confusion now. She then looked back, not noting that the format was similar to the last one, but there was no box to open. She scratched her head and racked her brain for an answer, but the solution to the riddle was being stubborn. It was then that her eyes had wandered over to the jacket on the bed. It was the only thing in the entire room that was out of place. As if it was the only article of clothing there, she picked it up, feeling the hooks lever material in her hooves. It was designed for a fall weather in mind, but not too thick or too thin. The last room's puzzle told the story of the room, so this one did the same, right? But the pieces were in the wrong location. Octavia then turned around to see the desk, seeing that the lamp itself had turned off. She hadn't even checked it, assuming that it wouldn't work. She then looked at the jacket, and then back on the bed, and then turned to the note. Is this really what it wants me to do? It seems ridiculous, but she had nothing to lose from trying it. Walking over to the desk, she tapped on the switch of the light. To her surprise, it turned on, illuminating that the part of the room with the lamp being such a success. She then turned around and tossed the jacket onto the floor. As if she had just gotten home and wanted some time to relax, she then placed her lantern on the side of the bed, before flopping it over on top of it. The motions felt similar and familiar, as if she just moved the Manhattan. She had been so exhausted just from her jobs that she would often just walk to her apartment like this and collapse. She then took a deep breath, letting out a low, slow sigh. The bed was actually more comfortable than she had expected. If it wasn't for the risk of imminent death running outside, she would have been tempted to take a nap. She then flustered her eyes open, looking out the room, wondering what she was just doing. Then she blinked, seeing something glint at her from under the vanity. She lifted herself up and looking incredulously at the glint. She quickly got off the bed and ducking down underneath the piece of furniture. Sitting there was an antique key, one embellished of a mare's face on it. But I looked there. You just can't. Octavia did stop herself from yelling at the world, but she just let out a frustrated huff of annoyance and tucked the key into her bag. Whatever, I have the second key now, so that means I just need to find one more, right? The world didn't respond, although she was fairly certain she knew the answer. She had the key, and she no longer needed to stay in this room. Packing up the lantern, she made her way back into the hallway. The walls of the hallway had several inch thick scratch marks running along the walls, as if a wild animal had run through and tore the drywall. She then looked to her left and right, making sure she wasn't alone in the house. They were just trying to scare you, Octavia, she said, keeping calm to herself. Just ignore them and move on. Her mantra was then only the trick for now, and as long as she kept her head level, she could keep her sanity. The next door came up on the right, directly in the middle of the hallway. There was a 50-50% chance that the key was in this room or the one down the hall. So she had to search this one, and move on if she had to. Her hoof pressed up against the handle, opening the door with a quiet creak. The phonograph instantly let out a shrill ringing as the hoof shot out of her from the crack of the door. Octavia screamed and her lantern fell into the ground as she jumped back, her hoof still gripping at the tide of the door. A horrendous feminine scream erupted from behind the door as her wood slammed against the flailing black hoof. A monster had been hidden in the room, waiting for her to open the door. 2 inches of the wood and a firm grip. It was the only thing that was stopping it from ripping it in her face. She refused to let go of the handle, keeping the monster's hoof trapped inside the door frame. The door jerked back. The monster tried forcibly open as the hoof continued to flail nearer her face. Octavia let out another terrified cry as she slammed the door down with the hoof of the monster letting out its own painted screams. She slammed the door against it again and again, letting out a terrified cry with each slam. The creature flailed in pain. Blood started to coat the door's edge with each slam. Octavia refused to relent, pressing one of the back hooves against the wall, tried to force the door shut on the creature. The last scream of pain erupted from the room as the door was yanked open just enough for the creature to pull its arm back in, before it slammed shut in her face. The sound of the door being locked echoed throughout the hallway as her phonograph died down. Just as quickly as it started back up, Octavia stood in place, panted heavily, still holding down the door shut, refusing to let go. She waited for several minutes, before her shaky hooves to let go of the door. She then sat down, staring at it at her body, while still recovering from the terrifying ordeal. What could have happened if it managed to grab a hold of her? What if she had let go of the door and the surprise that it had gotten out? What if it decided to stop hiding and it would come back out and attack her? She wrapped her hooves around her body, rocking gently in the hallway as she repeated to herself, "It's okay, Octavia. You're okay, Octavia. It's okay. You're gonna be okay." It was several minutes before her shivering finally stopped. She took several deep, shaky breaths, calming her beating heart. "You'll be okay, Octavia. You'll always come out okay at the end." She needed to smoke, although there was no way she was having a cigarette in the middle of the hallway, or anywhere inside of this house for that matter. If she had to get somewhere actual safe first, then she could pretty much indulge her addiction. Grabbing a hold of the lantern, she then stepped away from the door slowly, and she didn't even know if the door would suddenly burst open, but she didn't want to risk taking a sneak attack from it. Once she was halfway between it and the door, she finally turned around and rushed to the last door in the hallway. She then put a shaky hoof to the handle, prepared to slam it shut if it were to be hiding behind it again. It creaked open, and her phonograph remained silent. She pushed it open inch by inch until she could make out her way in. She even closed the door behind her. It was a relief that she couldn't spot any monsters in this room, although her nerves were still on edge. This room wasn't as the bedroom like last time, but rather a storage room. White boxes were stacked up all around the small square room. Even though more noticeably there were 4 boxes scattered around the room, there was at least another piece of paper sitting in the middle of the room, waiting for her to come out and read it. Stepping up from the note, she placed the lantern down and read what it had to say. "A butcher prepares for work. He opens his supplies. He is shocked. His meat was rotted overnight. He stabs the rotten meat in anger." Ugh. Octavia blanched in the imaginary. A butcher was a fairly rare occupation, although a necessary one for all the carnivore animals that ponies kept as pets. They kept mostly fish and poultry, but as a vegetarian species, an imaginary still made her feel very queasy. She then turned her head and closed the boxes, a pit dropping to her stomach, and she had a feeling that she wasn't going to like what she was about to see. Cautiously walking up to the box closest to her, she pressed one of her hooves and pulled open the lid. She blanched again, pulling her head away from the sight of the chicken corpses lying in the box. She then closed the side of the box, not wanting to smell the awful odor of their bodies. They weren't rotten, but she never wanted to stand the sight of dead animals. "The key in one of these boxes, is it?" She then shuddered at the thought. Maybe she'd just get lucky, and the key was just sticking out for her to grab. Hoping that might be the case, as she moved on to the next box and opened it up. Decapitated fish heads stared back up at her, as if for the moment they had died while frozen in their faces. Octavia shut the box faster than the last one. The smell was horrendous, but she could still tell it wasn't rancid. She wasn't sure of how all this meat had been preserved well in this room temperature space, but she didn't even feel much like questioning about it right now. She stepped over to the third box and flipped open its lid. She instantly gagged at the smell of rotting meat, the pungent odor hitting her like a truck. She then turned over to her head and wrenched and covering her mouth and nose. Her eyes watered from the foul stench. She grimaced and swallowed her nerves and peeked into the box. The meat in the box, the type was red meat that she hadn't seen before, with several parts of discolored gray, green, and brown from the serious state of decay it was in. Mixed alongside with the rotten meat was a glint of the metal one that looked clearly like it belonged to the next key that she needed. A disgusted groan escaped from her lips, realizing that she didn't have much of a choice but to get it out. Her other option was to stay trapped in the house until she either starved to death or the monster in that room got out to her. So, with a heavy gulp, she then closed her eyes and then reached down to the rotten meat. Glenchious, slimy filth crawled against her fur, causing her to violently shudder. She whimpered in disgust as her hooves dug down in the middle, but feeling like they were out of the metal keys they were in, she pried one of them her eyes open, looking down in the box just to make sure she was grabbing the right key. The key was still slightly buried, so she dug her hoof deeper, and a squelch of the meat echoing the room. Her hoof brushed against the key, and relief swelled over her, and she gripped it, pulling it free from its awful hiding place. The key was immediately dropped into the store's room as she shook her hoof, trying to get rid of the disgusting meat. Ew, 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 ew! She then scraped her hoof against the floor and the side of the box to open, as much as getting it off as she could. If the water was still running in the kitchen, she would desperately need to wash her hoof off. Ugh, now this completely awful experience is over, I can get out of here. She then picked up the still tainted key, taking a moment to look at it closer. This one had a knife embossed on it. Refusing to put it back in her bag so she did not get this disgusting filth along her other things, she decided to carry it back to the kitchen. Picking up a lantern with her mouth, she made her way down towards the door and was about to open when she froze. What if the creature had exited out of the room and was waiting for her in the hallway? She didn't want to be trapped in that storage room, but she wouldn't know unless she opened the door. She swallowed the lump of fear in her throat and slowly creaked open the door and listened carefully for any ringing from her phonograph. It was just open when a crack when her bag when it went silent. She tilted her head around the door and looked into the hallway. She could see straight out of the living room that there was no monster blocking her path. A relieved sigh escaped her lips as she pulled the door for the rest of the way, and the light of her lantern lit the walls now, revealing the black ooze that was dripping down them. Her nose scrunched at the sight, hearing what sounded like tar-like goo sloshing towards the ground. She moved quickly towards the hallway, only pausing outside of the door in the middle of the hallway, unsure if it was still locked or not. A strong scent hit her nose, and she looked down at the floor, noticing a pool of blood was spilling out from underneath the door. Wanting nothing more to do with it, she galloped past the door and exited out of the living room. The living room had also fallen into prey of the cruelty of the world. The couch was ripped apart, the blood was splattered against the coffee table, cups and the carpet was now starting to rot over with mold. Another gag escaped Octavia as she rushed to the kitchen. She wasn't faring any better than the rest of the house. Blood caked the walls and counters, deep scratch marks were buried into everything, and the door she needed to get a reek of blood running down diagonally across it. Rushing up to it, she then grabbed the top of the remaining lock and tried pressing the knife to the key to it. The lock refused to key no matter how she inserted it. Her brow frowned as she let go, dropping the next one and trying the next one instead. The key fit like a glove this time, unlocking the door with a satisfying click. A quick pull, and the lock came free of the door. Then it vanished with just a puff of ash. Just one more lock, and she'd be free. The last key she quickly fished out of her saddlebag, placed into the final lock, and another click, and the lock fell from its slot, just before vanishing into a ash of cloud. Finally free, she locks the kitchen door open with ease, opening up to the outside world. Octavia instantly rushed out of it to greet it, and as she came to a stop just outside the door, however, when she realized that it was pitch black outside. Night had fallen, and neither the moon or the stars could be seen in the sky. Why, how long was I in there? Octavia's confusion was understandable, for it hadn't felt like she had spent a half a day searching for the keys. However, the house had become more twisted as she found each key, so perhaps it had some kind of temporal effect. Well, that only furthered more proof that she needed to get to the park as quickly as possible. It was then that her ears twitched, hearing the sound of something heavy breathing against the darkness of the night. Dirt shifted against the ground, heavy fluid sloshed around underneath her skin, and with a groaning wail echoed around her. She shifted her attention to her left, and her eyes widening in fear as the creature slowly became visible within the light of her lantern. The upper half of the pony stood before her, standing as tall as the house. Its entire body was colored in sickly brown, and it looked like as if it was rotting away while alive. Its two front legs were disappointingly long in comparison to each body of its hooves, with the metal shoes bolted into them. Its head lacked ears, and eyes were wrapped in the thick, white cloth. Blood poured down from where its eyes should have been. Its mouth was sealed shut with stitches. A large gash down its chest was barely held together by them, as well as its muscles seemed to twitch and convulse under the skin, and the creature awakened, tilting its head up to look straight at Octavia. The large creature opened its mouth as best it could, tearing its skin at the stitches as it let out a screeching cry. Octavia then turned around and ran straight back to the door that she had just come out of, grabbing the handle and desperately tried to swing, twisting it to let her back in. The door was just jammed shut, refusing to let her back inside. "Open! Open, you stupid door! Open!" Her screeching terrified walls around and echoed as she slammed her hoof into the door. A hideous, huge crack of wood echoed out into the night as the giant monster's heavy hoof slammed Octavia directly against the door. It had smashed her so violently that the door unbuckled and broke underneath the impact. The giant hoof pulled back, Octavia's body slumping against the door when she twitched in pain. It was suddenly difficult for her to breathe. Her entire body screamed. She could feel something went trickling down her forehead and into the ground. Her blood? Was she bleeding? The creature cried out, and her mind instantly snapped awake. Her legs were shaky, but she managed to stand on them, running past the spot where she'd been lying, and just to avoid the massive hoof that came crashing down. She ran looking for a way out, a way to escape. She came to a skidding halt as a large fence blocked her path. The wall of the house to her right, her broken door behind her, and to her left was a giant monster blocking her way out. She would have had to get through that giant creature if she wanted to escape. The blocker let out another wailing screech, its hoof lifting into the air and slammed down against her. She then just barely jumped out of the way, the ground caving in from impact of the blocker's hoof. Her legs had wobbled, feeling the wind and debris rush past her, with the sheer impact she had gotten, luckily surviving the impact against the door. She couldn't guarantee with that second. Octavia snapped her head towards its main body, watching it pull its hoof back towards it. It seemed that there was a delay between each strike. It needed time to pull its leg back before it could strike again. If there was any way past it, she would have to go right for it at the right moment. She looked around, spotting the lantern right in the middle of the same area. It seemed that she had been stuck the first time she rolled her eyes on her own, and it was conveniently lit up for the area for her. She dug into her hind legs in the dirt, crouching down as low as she watched the blocker's second leg rise into the air just as it came down and bolted forward. Managing to escape attack by inches, she ran straight for the creature, then into the side, looking away around it. Its fat body was pressed up against the fence behind it. Even though she could squeeze her way around it to the side, she wouldn't be able to fit through the door. However, something in the corner of the creature's arm did catch her eye. There was a red gasoline canister, just standing there just as if out of place. Without a second thought, she grabbed the canister, a hold of it, not sure what to do with it just yet. Another loud screech echoed in the air, as Octavia felt a sudden pull from behind. A fearful surprised scream echoed her throat as the metal hoof of the monster had grabbed her tail and lifted her up into the air. She flailed her hind legs in desperation, feeling the immense pain as her tail hairs stranded to hold up her body. The blocker then pulled its hoof back before flicking rather suddenly across the arena and away from him. She slammed it into the house as well with a hard thud, with air escaping from her lungs as her body came crashing down to earth. She coughed and sputtered, feeling the pain begin to swell in her back legs. She opened her eyes with a wince, breathing heavily as she stared back up at the monster. It was staring right back at her. A gurgling growl escaped from its throat as it watched her, taunting her. Her hooves unfurled from the gas canister, having held on to its dear life, since she looked like she had been tossed like a rag doll. She jiggled a bit, checking to see if there was any gas in it. It was full, very full. She then could feel the gasoline sloshing around inside, waiting to be used. She had a wade, though. The blocker wailed as it readied its another attack, intending to crush her on the spot. Octavia grabbed the handle like the gas with her mouth, sprung forward with the hoof crashing down where she had been laying. With her front hooves, she quickly grabbed the tip of the canister and twisted it hard, the black cup unscrewing it with a bit of effort. The pungent odor of gasoline filled her nose as she turned to glaring at the creature. She raced forward as the blocker's arm was now being retracted to the attack. She flung her head to push to one side, a splash of gasoline spilling out and splashing against its body. The blocker let out a cry of pain some more as some of it landed onto its gaping, stitched wound. She then grabbed the canister with her hooves and splashed it again, this time hitting some of it on the ground, as well as the creature's body. As well as the preparation set up, she let out a desperate cry as she slammed the rest of the canister directly onto the open wound. An even louder pained cry ran out of the sky just in time, as Octavia felt the pain of her tail being grabbed once more. She let out another fearful scream as she flailed into the air, trying to get the creature to let go. The flick came faster this time, her body slamming roughly into the house again. She hit the ground hard and crumpled into a ball, holding her chest and stomach, feeling her body trembling. Was she bleeding? She wasn't so sure anymore. Her vision started to go blurry from the pain. She couldn't tell if she had a concussion or not. Her saddlebag pressed smartly against her side, reminding her of what she needed to do. She then rolled onto her stomach, breathing heavily as the blurry sight of the blocker came into view. It gargled a cry as it tilted its head at her, pulling its leg back, getting ready to strike again. She didn't break an eye contact as she put her hoof inside of the saddlebag, quickly rummaging around for what she needed. The blocker pulled its arm back all the way, lifting its arm in preparation to attack. Her hoof found what it was looking for and firmly pulled it out. With a push of the lever, the lighter it up with a gentle flame. She then tossed the lighter, praying to Celestia that it hit her target. The flames erupted from the middle of the arena, quickly rushing down the trail that she had just set, straight onto the blocker's body. The blocker then let out a wailing shriek as its head began to twitch rapidly, the flames spreading across its body instantly. Its legs flailed around the yard, slamming down on the ground repeatedly, unable to pull itself out. The fire spread up to the creature's wounds and directly into the gasoline tank, just as Octavia had hoped. A large explosion erupted from the backyard, flames spewing up into the sky. The creature let out one foul wailing cry as it collapsed into the yard, its entire body being engulfed by the flames. Octavia had found herself sitting up against the house, leaning her back against the wall, and she watched the fire burn. She grunted in pain, her mind still hazy from being tossed around like that. She lifted her hoof and let it hit something lying next to her. She then turned her head to see that her lighter had been blown back to her. None of the worst fear, but she encountered her fortunes that she would have picked up. A new idea forming in her head. From her saddlebag she pulled out a carton of cigarettes and counted her remaining stock. She had 3 sticks left, not nearly enough. Popping one out, she quickly grabbed it and put it in her mouth before putting the bag back and lighting at the end of it with her lighter. She inhaled deeply, letting the smoke fill her lungs, before letting out slowly. At least the fire was strangely comforting.